The individual historically known as Diana, Princess of Wales, was born on July 1, 1961, as Diana Frances Spencer. Her birthplace was Park House, located within the royal estate at Sandringham, in the county of Norfolk, England. Her father was Edward John Spencer, born on January 24, 1924, into the nobility with the title Viscount Althorp. Being the only son of the 7th Earl Spencer, the Spencer lineage constituted one of Britain's most prominent aristocratic families, tracing their descent from John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough, a leading statesman and military commander in Europe during the late 17th and early 18th centuries. Edward John spent his late teenage years during the initial period of the Second World War at the Royal Military College Sandhurst before serving as a captain in the Royal Scots Greys Regiment. His commendable contribution to the war effort was recognized during the Allied invasion of Europe in the summer of 1944, aimed at establishing a Western front in France against the Nazis. From there, he commanded a British Army unit in an operation that successfully liberated 2 French towns. Following the war, Spencer served as assistant to the governor of South Australia from 1947 to 1950. He subsequently held various local and state offices, including county councillor, High Sheriff for Northamptonshire, and Justice of the Peace for Norfolk. Diana's mother was Frances Ruth Roche, born on January 20, 1936, also at Park House, Sandringham. She was the daughter of a baron who cultivated a close friendship with King George VI. Her own mother served as a lady-in-waiting to his queen consort. At the age of 18, Frances married Viscount Althorp at Westminster Abbey. They had 5 children: Sarah, born in 1955, Jane, who followed 2 years later, their first son John, born in 1960 but tragically dying just hours after his birth, Diana a year later, and finally Charles in 1964. They divorced in 1967 and both later remarried. A royal journalist reported that instances of violent temper from the Viscount may have led to the marriage's failure, with Diana witnessing her father physically striking her mother on at least one occasion. Although custody of their children was granted to the Viscount, Frances spent the remainder of her life in relative seclusion on the Scottish island of Seal. Despite her relocation, a drink-driving ban and occasional disagreements with Diana brought Frances into the public eye via the press, but she was largely able to focus on charity work until her death on June 3, 2004. Having experienced her own parents' divorce, Diana grew up as a child of separation and was aware of the complications that could arise. However, nothing could have prepared her for the difficulties her own unhappy marriage would create from the mid-1980s onwards. Diana came of age during a period when Britain was undergoing extensive transformations politically, culturally, socially, and economically. The backdrop of the latter half of the 20th century was one where Britain was recovering after the devastation and upheaval caused by the Second World War. Coupled with the emergence of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States and its allies, including Britain, fueled by the conflicting ideologies of democracy and communism. Compulsory national military service and food rationing persisted in Britain throughout the latter half of the 1940s and into the early 1950s. Nevertheless, the accession of Queen Elizabeth II at just 25 years old in 1952 represented in many ways a turning point in 20th century British history. The years that followed saw renewed economic expansion, and by the end of the decade, prospects for average British citizens had significantly improved, marked by low unemployment, higher incomes, and enhanced living conditions and entertainment options. Subsequently, the arrival of the 1960s brought a social revolution, with notable shifts in music, fashion, and attitudes. Spending on non-essential items increased, and the majority of households now own televisions. This meant Diana grew up at a time when mass media truly gained prominence, offering people easy access to the Beatles, BBC television, and more details than ever before about the royal family. For example, in 1960, the year before Diana's birth, the first ever royal wedding was televised, that of Queen Elizabeth's sister, Princess Margaret, to Anthony Armstrong Jones, heir to the Earldom of Snowdon and an accomplished photographer. The 1970s, however, constituted a decade marked by strikes, as trade unions engaged in widespread industrial action driven by demands for improved working conditions. Britain's global empire had concluded with decolonization across Africa. In Northern Ireland, the Troubles, a period of internal sectarian conflict between Roman Catholic Republicans and Presbyterian Unionists, escalated into widespread bombings, with the Irish Republican Army (IRA) eventually extending their campaign to England itself. To exacerbate matters, from 1973 onwards, much of the Western world experienced a two-year recession, triggered by inflation resulting from the global oil crisis, which led to higher energy and commodity prices, thereby ending the economic boom enjoyed in the preceding decade. Progressive legislation, such as the 1975 Sex Discrimination Act, the 1976 Race Relations Act, and the 1979 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, all signaled Britain's attempts to move towards a more equitable society. However, one aspect that had not fundamentally changed was the upper-class system and its associated protocols, still comprising 5 ranks of aristocratic nobility listed in order of precedence: Duke, Marquis, Earl, Viscount, and Baron. The royal family occupied the pinnacle of this hierarchy. All these factors ensured that Britain was a society undergoing change by the time Diana reached adulthood, yet in certain critical respects, it remained tethered to the past. One of the most significant issues was that attitudes towards divorce and marital separation in Britain remained traditional by the 1980s. This would considerably influence Diana's later life, as the British press became fixated on the possibility of her and her future husband separating in a manner that would not attract the same level of attention in the 2020s. Diana's formative years were deeply embedded in British aristocratic life. The Sandringham estate, where Queen Elizabeth II leased Park House to the Spencer family, frequently hosted royal gatherings. Consequently, Diana grew up familiar with life within the royal circle, even referring to the Queen as Aunt Lilibet. She also played with 2 of the Queen's sons, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, during her younger years. However, the Queen's eldest son, Charles, the Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, was already entering his teenage years when Diana was born, meaning they had no real contact during her youth due to their significantly different age groups. In her second year there, upon her grandfather's death, she acquired the title Lady as her father became Earl Spencer and moved into the hereditary Spencer seat at Althorpe in Northamptonshire. Despite describing her time at Westheath as the happiest days of her life, Diana struggled academically in many subjects and failed her O-level examinations twice before relocating to the Institut Alpin Vitaminette in Switzerland during 1977. This was a finishing school intended to prepare students for life and the associated courtesies and protocols of upper-class society. In November 1977, a grouse hunt took place at her family estate in Althorpe, and Diana was present when her older sister, Sarah, arrived on a date with the heir to the throne, Charles, Prince of Wales. Romance proved fleeting for Sarah. They dated for only a short period, with the prince ending the relationship on a skiing trip. Sarah famously told the press she would never marry him, whether he was a dustman or the King of England. Charles and Diana noticed each other for the first time on this occasion. Charles described Diana as jolly, amusing, fun, and attractive, while Diana playfully remarked to her friends about marrying him. Some sources suggest Charles remained enamored with Camilla Parker Bowles at this juncture, despite her marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles 4 years prior. Charles and Camilla had dated for a time in the early 1970s, but Charles had refrained from proposing to her, reportedly due to her family's lack of aristocratic titles and her perceived extensive dating history, which would contravene the traditional expectation for a princess and future queen to embody a virginal, unsullied image when marrying the heir to the throne. As a result of Charles's hesitation, Camilla had moved on and married. However, she and Charles, in retrospect, remained the enduring loves of each other's lives and maintained extensive contact throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s. In 1978, Diana finished school. Subsequently, she pursued various low-paid jobs, including serving as a nanny for a wealthy American couple, a dance instructor, a cleaner, a party hostess, and then an assistant nursery teacher at the Young England School in Pimlico. As a gift for her 18th birthday, Diana's mother purchased her a flat at Coleherne Court in Earl's Court, Kensington, in central London, where she resided with 3 flatmates. These were years of liberation for Diana. She had found her childhood largely unhappy and unstable, contending with her parents' troubled marriage and the subsequent separation. In the 1970s, she had a very poor relationship with her stepmother, Rain McCorquodale, who married Diana's father in 1976. Diana described her as a bully, and on one occasion, Rain allegedly pushed her stepdaughter down a flight of stairs. Despite these difficulties, Diana had developed from a shy child into a confident and beautiful young woman who socialized with aristocratic and powerful individuals, exposing her to a wide range of potential opportunities. In November 1978, Diana received an invitation to Prince Charles's 30th birthday celebrations at Buckingham Palace, the Queen Elizabeth II's famed London residence. Diana was neither intimidated by the guests nor her surroundings and found the company and event fascinating, apparently making a favorable impression on the prince. However, in August 1979, Lord Mountbatten, Charles's great-uncle and a significant influence during his early years, was assassinated by the IRA, leaving Charles devastated. He sought solace from Camilla, which fueled rumors that the pair had secretly resumed a romantic relationship. This relationship was reportedly accepted by Camilla's husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, as he himself had been involved with numerous partners since beginning his relationship with Camilla. Despite this, during the following year, in July 1980, Charles showed Diana strong signs of affection when they met again at the home of Philip de Pass, a mutual friend hosting a party in Sussex. This encounter marked the beginning of their official courtship. Diana was invited to stay with Charles in London, where the royal establishment would be consulted for approval of the relationship. 2 months later, in September 1980, Diana was invited to visit Queen Elizabeth's Scottish residence at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. There, the couple underwent scrutiny from the monarch and her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Charles had clearly invited Diana to meet his parents so they could assess her suitability to become his wife at a time when selecting the future queen consort was regarded as a political decision as much as a personal and emotional one. Private Secretary Lord Charteris was present during the visit, reporting that Diana, in short, impressed Charles by appearing beautiful, composed, and acting jolly. Queen Elizabeth also noticed this and commented that she found her charming and appropriate. Referred to by the media as the test of Balmoral, Diana and Charles received their blessing, which ignited considerable public interest. The press engaged in a race to be the first to publish photographs of the young woman who was dubbed Shy Di. With the couple's relationship now public, it created a dynamic that challenged the royal establishment. It empowered tabloid newspapers to scrutinize and publish stories about Charles and Diana. The papers cared little whether the stories were positive or negative, so long as they sold copies. Such was the imperative to maintain a positive regal image that in November 1980, the royals demanded an apology from one tabloid newspaper when it claimed Charles had used the royal train to meet Diana secretly. This was controversial as the tax-funded transport was intended for official public duties only. In early 1981, acting on the recommendation of Charles's father, Prince Philip, Charles resolved to commit to Diana to reduce the intense press attention and to protect both Diana and himself from potentially damaging their reputations. Accordingly, on February 6th, he proposed at Windsor Castle, and Diana accepted. They officially announced the news to the BBC 2 weeks later in a press statement that generated controversy. When the reporter conducting the interview asked them both if they were in love, Diana promptly replied, "Of course." However, Charles added, "Whatever love means." This remark was interpreted by some as an early indication of discord between the couple. Although in the same interview, Diana showed positive signs by stating she was prepared for the challenges of joining the royal establishment, as she had Charles's unwavering support. Nevertheless, numerous other reasons for concern existed, had anyone chosen to notice. Charles was already approaching his mid-30s, while Diana was just 19, and their courtship had been notably brief. A biography of Diana written many years later concluded that Diana and Charles had met only 12 or 13 times when Charles proposed. All signs suggested a potentially troubled future. Diana selected her own engagement ring, which departed from royal tradition because it was not custom-made by the royal jeweler. She chose an 18-karat white gold band adorned with a Ceylon sapphire, picked from a catalog accessible to others. This was the initial indication of her desire to forge her own path as a member of the royal family rather than strictly adhering to tradition. Shortly after the wedding announcement, Diana relocated to Clarence House in Westminster, London, one of the Queen Mother's residences. Although Diana would later move to Buckingham Palace for the remainder of her engagement period, she found this to be an incredibly solitary time. On March 9, 1981, the couple made their first public appearance together at a charity musical concert at Goldsmiths Hall in central London. Diana was met with intense press attention as she emerged from her car wearing a black, shoulderless dress that was 2 sizes too small and revealed more than typical royal fashion etiquette would permit. One reporter suggested it resembled watching Cinderella exchange her rags for riches, likening the event to a fairy tale. However, Diana found it an unbearable experience that underscored some harsh realities about her future. Following the Goldsmiths event, an after-party was held at Buckingham Palace, where Diana met Princess Grace of Monaco, formerly known as Grace Kelly, an Oscar-winning American actress before marrying into royalty. Grace offered comfort to Diana, who became upset about the appropriateness of her dress and minor details of acceptable etiquette, such as which arm to carry one's handbag on. Bursting into tears, Diana realized her future life would be characterized by scrutiny and pressure, which Princess Grace wryly remarked would only intensify, oddly lightening the conversation and creating a bond between the pair. In the months leading up to the wedding, Diana grew increasingly suspicious of the relationship between Charles and Camilla, particularly after she discovered a personalized bracelet her future husband had purchased for Camilla. Diana nearly canceled the wedding on this occasion, but her sisters persuaded her to proceed with the engagement. Later that month, as she watched her fiancé depart from Heathrow Airport for a 6-week tour, Diana was photographed crying. Charles had reportedly taken a call from Camilla just before his departure. On July 28, 1981, Diana experienced a severe episode of her eating disorder, bulimia, a condition from which she suffered periodically throughout her life. In this instance, it was triggered by the anticipation of her impending wedding. The following day, she spent the night with her sister, Lady Fellows, at Clarence House and received a signet ring from her fiancé, along with a note expressing his pride in her and offering reassurance that if she looked people in the eye, she would win their hearts. Diana slept poorly due to the singing crowds of gathering spectators and feelings of anticipation. Upon waking, she described herself as feeling helplessly numb as she accepted the world was watching, with foreign dignitaries from across the globe scheduled to attend. Dressing in a $9,000 ivory-colored gown adorned with 10,000 embroidered pearls and featuring a 25-meter train, longer than any seen at a previous royal wedding, Diana was subtly deviating from the royal tradition of strictly pure white styles. On July 29, 1981, Diana officially became the Princess of Wales upon marrying Charles, to the delight of 750 million global television viewers and 500,000 spectators lining the streets around their chosen venue, St. Paul's Cathedral in central London. Described by many as a fairy tale wedding, it was a monumental event that saw the United Kingdom observe a public holiday. Numerous celebrations took place across the country and further afield in Commonwealth nations such as Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. At the Church of England ceremony, the couple requested the removal of the traditional wife's promise to obey her husband, a decision that seems entirely modern today, but attracted attention from the press in 1981. The wedding reception was held afterwards at Buckingham Palace, where 27 wedding cakes and an official cake supplied by the Royal Navy, standing 5 feet tall and weighing 225 pounds, were served. In addition to the lavish wedding day costs for the ceremony, there were significant expenses for security measures due to the threat from the IRA and for crowd management, making this an expensive event estimated to cost $57 million. Crowds were thrilled when Charles and Diana appeared on the balcony and shared a kiss, with fireworks and 100 beacons illuminating the country into the night. Despite the splendor of the occasion, however, it was, in retrospect, a destined-to-fail union. To make matters worse, during the honeymoon, Charles reportedly wore cufflinks given to him by Camilla, and Diana discovered their origin during the trip. She suspected more and more that he was still unable to move on from his previous relationship. Despite this, public sentiment assumed the new Princess of Wales was happy, having just attained the third highest rank for a woman in Britain, according to aristocratic precedents. The newlyweds took up residence at Kensington Palace in London and Highgrove House in Gloucestershire after marrying. It was shortly after moving into these residences that the royal family announced Diana's pregnancy on November 5, 1981. 2 months later, she fell down some stairs at Sandringham while only 12 weeks pregnant, but fortunately, the unborn baby was unharmed. We understand today that Diana intentionally caused the fall due to her increasing depression and feelings of inadequacy within the royal establishment. To make matters worse, in February 1982, photographs of Diana pregnant in a bikini were published in the media. This deeply upset the royals, with the Queen publicly condemning those who took and released the photos. However, on June 21, 1982, Prince William Arthur Philip Louis of Wales was born at St. Mary's Hospital in London, automatically becoming second in line to the British throne. This came at some personal cost to Diana, as she suffered postnatal depression in the subsequent months. Her condition worsened when her friend Princess Grace of Monaco died on September 14, 1982, having suffered a stroke while driving, resulting in her car plunging off a cliff, with only her daughter Princess Stephanie surviving. Diana attended the funeral despite her husband reportedly telling her he saw no reason for her presence. There, Diana wore a black dress and became a focal point of press attention, with some critics suggesting she appeared to relish it, attracting both criticism and praise. Charles and Diana took 9-month-old Prince William on their first joint royal tour of Australia and New Zealand in March 1983. This broke royal precedent, as young children were traditionally left at home when working royals toured the Empire or Commonwealth nations in previous eras. Upon arriving in Alice Springs, Australia, Diana's tour began somewhat poorly, with some Australian media reporting that she looked miserable. The royals sought to win the affection and support of the public in the Commonwealth country to reaffirm backing for the British monarchy, whose queen remained a symbolic head of state for many nations worldwide. The young prince stayed with a nanny at the tour base on a farm at Woolmargama in central Australia as the royal couple commenced visits to famous sites such as the sacred Uluru, more widely known as Ayers Rock. As the tour progressed, Diana's ability to charm was complemented by her beauty and style. Her popularity grew globally, even in challenging former colonial countries that were increasingly skeptical of lingering ties to the British monarchy. For instance, crowds began to gather specifically to see Diana, who was estimated to have shaken the hands of around 6,000 people during the tour of Australia, developing her popular image as someone accessible and relatable to the public while also appearing grounded and willing to diverge from royal protocols. The 2-month tour concluded successfully for the royal couple. However, with the focus shifting increasingly towards Diana, resentment was generated as Charles, accustomed to being the center of attention, was at times sidelined. This created pressure on their relationship, which they found continued upon their return to London. On February 14, 1984, the papers published the news of Diana's second pregnancy, having confirmed the information the previous night. This marked a period of uncharacteristic happiness for the couple, during which they grew closest as husband and wife. With her husband hoping for a baby girl, Diana feared disappointing him when she discovered it was a boy, and consequently decided to withhold the sex from Charles until the birth of their second child, Prince Harry, on September 15, 1984. As a mother, Diana prioritized her children and often disregarded Charles's wishes and royal traditions. For instance, she arranged their childcare independently, selected William and Harry's clothing, and chose their school as they grew older, rather than relying on royal household staff to carry out these tasks, as many royal couples had done for centuries. All of this contributed to the growing public perception of Diana as the people's princess, a royal figure who seemed to possess the common touch and had little inclination for the rituals and formality of the traditional aristocracy. Diana's royal duties resumed in 1985 after she recovered from her pregnancy. Life as a working royal during this period involved supporting the Queen as sovereign, undertaking tours across the country, and symbolic visits to civic and military locations, such as her launch of HMS Cornwall, where Diana continued to attract crowds and influence fashion with her demeanor and style. In April, Diana, Charles, William, and Harry visited Italy, where they met both the Italian President Alessandro Pertini and Pope John Paul II. This was followed by a second trip to Australia later in the year, where the public and media nicknamed Diana the Diamond Princess. A more widely known affair was with her former horse riding instructor, Major James Hewitt, with whom Diana was involved between 1986 and 1991. Diana later confirmed the affair, as did Hewitt. However, persistent theories suggesting Prince Harry bears a strong resemblance to Hewitt and is his biological son have been dismissed by Hewitt, who stated that his affair with Diana did not commence until 2 years after Harry was born. What all of this clarifies, however, is that Diana herself was involved in several prolonged affairs throughout her marriage to Charles. Thus, although Diana later asserted that her marriage failed because there were 3 people in it, referring to herself, Charles, and Camilla, in reality, Diana was also unfaithful herself for much of the marriage. Scrutiny of the lives of the Prince and Princess of Wales intensified when Diana fainted in May during the Expo 86 World Fair in Vancouver, Canada, prompting many to question her health and the demanding schedule that saw her fly to Tokyo shortly afterwards, where she was photographed looking pale and exhausted. Diana was immensely popular globally, including in Japan, which ensured the 8-day tour was packed with activity. However, the couple successfully concealed any marital issues throughout the trip. In November 1986, Diana undertook a short tour of the Middle East, where she met King Fahd of Saudi Arabia and Sultan Qaboos bin Said Al Said of Oman. One might pause at this point and ask who exactly this young woman was who was involved in such complex political matters in the 1980s and was at one time assumed destined to become the Queen of England one day. Diana's personality is often obscured by the public admiration she received due to her charitable work and the perception of her as the victim of a political marriage. But who was she away from the media spotlight? Diana possessed a mix of charm and confidence, beneath which lay many insecurities and emotional turmoil. Friends noted that she could transition from one mood to another relatively quickly. Thus, the young woman who had to behave a certain way at a royal event, or who was furious due to some media reports and intrusion into her life at a given time, could quickly become more cheerful when with friends. Other lifelong friends remarked on Diana's paradoxical nature. The fashion entrepreneur Roberto Deverick, for instance, noted that Diana could be extremely mature in some situations, but conversely, entirely immature in others. Similarly, despite the significant number of responsibilities thrust upon her, she could also exhibit childlike qualities in many ways. This paradoxical combination was what earned her the admiration of so many. Her open and innocent manner, even in serious circumstances. Her younger brother Charles perhaps provided the most insightful observation on this, noting that Diana's great strength and weakness was her honesty. Yet even this could often be masked by her tendency to exaggerate, even when she was being truthful. In short, she was a complex individual. Elsewhere in her life, during the second half of the 1980s, the tabloid press continued to focus on exposing the failing marriage and had highlighted a growing discomfort between Diana and Charles, noting when they failed to appear together at events such as the wedding of Lady Amanda Ellingworth or the solo summer holiday Charles took at Balmoral. Diana was aware from her charity engagements that her work often benefited from press attention, but her position also attracted relentless coverage of personal stories, which she found upsetting. This situation also led to a gradual deterioration in her relationship with her mother-in-law. When Charles first introduced Diana to his parents as a potential wife, the Queen and her husband had been impressed by her and developed an affection for Diana. That relationship remained solid through the initial years of their marriage and the births of William and Harry. However, in the latter half of the 1980s, it became more strained as media focus on the problems within her and Charles's marriage persisted. For Elizabeth, whose guiding principle, inherited from her own parents, was never complain, never explain, a key component of which was avoiding the public airing of the royal family's private difficulties. The breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage created unprecedented challenges during her long reign. Evidence suggests she did not hold Diana responsible for the issues that grew from the mid-1980s onwards, but neither could she overlook the fact that Diana's arrival into the royal fold had precipitated the first significant and ongoing controversies of her reign, more than 30 years after it began. As 1988 commenced, Diana and Charles continued undertaking international visits, including tours to Thailand and Australia, as their official royal duties expanded. That year alone, they attended nearly 200 events. Diana maintained her focus on charities dedicated to cancer treatment and support, opening what would become known as Children with Cancer UK and assuming the role of patroness in addition to positions she already held with the Red Cross and several other charitable organizations. All this work continued to earn her praise in many circles in Britain, even as the media frenzy regarding her personal life persisted. By 1989, Diana was living a largely separate existence from her husband. In February, while at a birthday party, she courageously confronted Camilla in a private conversation, informing her that she was aware of the affair and wanted her husband back. Camilla met the accusation with denial, and so in the year that followed, things continued along the same path. Diana remained newsworthy when she hugged a child suffering from AIDS before her busy schedule took her on a tour of Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates the following month. Her duties were now increasing to approximately 300 official engagements per year, a considerable burden for a woman still only in her late 20s, balancing motherhood with a highly complicated personal life. In March 1990, Diana and Charles toured Nigeria and the Republic of Cameroon, where she highlighted projects centered on women's education and healthcare. In May, the couple made history by being the first royals to visit formerly Soviet-aligned Hungary, one of many Eastern European countries that had recently liberated itself from a communist regime the previous year. Despite potential East-West conflict with the USSR seemingly easing as the Cold War concluded largely peacefully in the Middle East, Britain was one of 35 nations condemning Iraq for its invasion of Kuwait. This invasion was triggered by a dispute over oil pricing and deep historical disagreements in August 1990. When Iraq refused to withdraw, the First Gulf War began, a conflict that would result in the loss of 47 British military personnel. Diana was eager to demonstrate her support for British troops and their families. In December, she traveled to Germany, where she met British soldiers and their families stationed at Bergen-Hohen Garrison near Hanover. During this visit, she assured the 750 military families stationed there that they would not be forgotten at Christmas time while fighting overseas. She also authored a motivational letter to the troops, which was published through the British military's internal communications in the new year. In 1991, Diana's royal duties included a trip to Kingston in Canada, a solo journey to Pakistan, and a visit to Brazil, where she drew attention to organizations working to combat poverty and provide assistance to homeless children. In her capacity as a mother, Diana remained dedicated to her children and characteristically unfazed by royal protocol when she participated in Harry's school sports day event, running barefoot in a skirt during a race between the parents in June. When Prince William suffered a head injury from a golf club and was hospitalized, Diana spent the entire night at his bedside, ensuring he was recovering following a successful operation. In response to this publicity crisis, the Queen and Prince Philip intervened, attempting to protect the establishment. However, mediation efforts proved unsuccessful. In August 1992, the situation escalated when a private tape recording of an intimate conversation between Diana and a childhood friend, James Gilby, was leaked to the press. In this recording, Diana described her marriage as a torture, expressing a feeling of being trapped. There was no confirmation that Diana and James were having an affair. However, she expressed concern their recent meeting might be discovered, while he used affectionate terms and the pet name Squidge multiple times. The ensuing publication and furore surrounding it became known as Squidgygate. Conspiracy theorists believe the timing of the leaked recordings was an attempt to tarnish public support and an empathy for Diana, which had grown following the revelations in Morton's book. Although no evidence supported this theory, it exemplifies how conspiracy theories began to proliferate as people in the public and the royal establishment started to align themselves. In November 1992, a final attempt was made to demonstrate to the world that the marriage could be salvaged when Charles and Diana were sent on a 4-day royal tour of South Korea. However, the photographs taken during the trip had the opposite effect. The couple appeared unhappy and were described as the glums, a term that had first surfaced in the 1980s. Meanwhile, back in England, the Queen herself made a rare public statement regarding her feelings about the controversy Diana and Charles's marital woes were generating, compounded by other family difficulties. In a speech she delivered on November 24, 1992, commemorating the 40th anniversary of her accession to the throne, she stated, "1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis, a horrible year." Just 2 weeks later, at the Queen's request, the Conservative Prime Minister, John Major, officially announced that Charles and Diana had amicably decided to separate, but had no plans for divorce. Their constitutional positions remained unaffected, and parental custody of their 2 sons was equally divided. Damage limitation to the establishment was the likely driving force behind the announcement, as it specifically emphasized that no third party was involved in the couple's decision, although this did not quell press speculation. In January 1993, a leaked intimate conversation between Charles and Camilla, recorded 4 years earlier, was released to Australian tabloid newspapers before being sent to the press in Britain and globally. The nature of the conversation reflected poorly on Charles and led to Camilla being heavily criticized by many newspapers. Diana reacted privately to the transcript with disgust, but also appeared to be boosted by her husband's public embarrassment, reportedly declaring to her bodyguard that it was game, set, and match. in the battle for public opinion. In March, Diana embarked on her first solo royal trip following the separation, visiting a leprosy hospital in Nepal. She famously met patients in an attempt to challenge another widespread stigma. Despite the usual continuation of everyday duties, Diana's opinion of Charles continued to deteriorate. In a letter to her bodyguard in June, she accused him of being in a relationship with his personal assistant, Tiggy Leggeborg, whom he had hired as a nanny for Harry and William. Diana resented this appointment. Tiggy and Charles's relationship was never proven, and it seems doubtful that it ever occurred. In the months that followed, Diana was consumed by the separation and particularly the ever-present public scrutiny, so much so that by December 1993, she reevaluated her life and declared in a statement that she was stepping back from public life due to the intense press intrusion of the past 12 years and the resulting pressure on her personal life. Stressing her continued involvement in charity work, she thanked the public for its support and advised that she would now aim for a more sustainable work-life balance, fulfilling her duties while maintaining some level of personal privacy. In June 1994, around the time Diana attended the 50th anniversary of the D-Day landings in northern France, Charles had been Prince of Wales for 22 years. To mark this, he was interviewed by journalist Jonathan Dimbleby for a documentary covering his royal duties worldwide for almost a year. The documentary also provided him with a platform from which he chose to discuss his marriage. Around 13 million viewers watched as he admitted to adultery, adding that it was only after the marriage was irreparable and confirming the next day that the affair was with Camilla. This news was not a revelation, as the press had by then uncovered affairs involving both parties in the marriage, but it was a shock to the public to hear it from the future king's own lips and created further divisions between those who supported Diana and those who were sympathetic to Charles. On the same evening the interview aired, attending a dinner event in the Serpentine Gallery, London, Diana wore an evening gown styled outside the usual boundaries of royal conservatism. This led to it becoming popularly referred to as the revenge dress, with some journalists stating it symbolized Diana's breaking free from the rules of the royal establishment and reclaiming control of her life. In January 1995, Camilla and her husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, announced plans to divorce, rekindling speculation about the status of her revived relationship with Charles. In the months that followed, Diana did not react publicly, but instead focused on her duties when she made a royal visit to Emperor Akihito in Japan, attended the Venice Biennale Art Festival, and undertook a trip to Moscow where she received the International Leonardo Prize in recognition of her charitable work. This resulted in divided opinions. Some argued she was unfairly attempting to portray herself as a victim of psychological abuse from Charles, while others supported her for bravely speaking out against an outdated establishment that they felt was not supporting a vulnerable family member. When the interview aired, it caused a crisis for the royal image, with quotes suggesting Diana did not view Charles as a suitable heir to the throne, and confirming that both of them had been involved in extramarital affairs. Consequently, the Queen wrote letters to both Diana and Charles advising them to finalize their divorce and put an end to the constant press attention, with all its associated negative insights into the royal family. Unsurprisingly, Charles accepted the Queen's recommendation. Diana was upset by the letter, feeling she was being told to agree to the divorce rather than being asked, but she eventually consented. Divorce negotiations concluded on August 28, 1996, resulting in joint custody of the children, a lump sum of $17 million, and an annual allowance of $400,000 awarded to Diana. She retained the title Princess of Wales while relinquishing the title Her Royal Highness. All royal duties would continue until such time as she remarried. In January 1997, as patron of the Halo Trust, Diana was famously seen being guided through a minefield in Angola in southern Africa. This was one of many locations the trust aimed to clear of explosive ordnances, which were causing death or injury to people daily. Angola had been the scene of a protracted and brutal civil war, and a front in the Cold War from the mid-1970s onwards as it sought independence from Portugal. The visit attracted some criticism from a distinguished member of the British Ministry of Defense, Earl Howe, who described Diana as interfering with politics, which was strictly prohibited by royal convention. But despite this complaint, photographs of her wearing a flak jacket and helmet were published globally as she again successfully raised awareness for a charitable cause. Back in Britain, following the divorce, Diana remained at Kensington Palace. Having resided there since her marriage to Charles, and was still a very influential figure. She associated with a wide range of people, including celebrity friends such as Elton John and George Michael. She continued to be linked romantically with men, and those closest to Diana recall her describing heart surgeon Hasnat Khan as the love of her life when she dated him between 1995 and 1997. Although it remains unclear who ended the relationship, within 1 month she was dating Dodi Fayed, the wealthy son of the owner of Harrods department store. Flying from Sardinia to Paris, Diana and Dodi were followed as they had dinner on August 30th at the Ritz Hotel in the French capital, with paparazzi waiting outside on motorbikes, ready to take pictures when the couple departed. Upon arriving at the hotel, Diana had called her 2 sons, who were at Balmoral Castle with Charles. She also later called a journalist friend, whom she informed that she was about to make a drastic change in her life, fulfilling her remaining royal duties before removing herself from public attention permanently. After this, the couple ate dinner in their suite, during which Dodi became suspicious that some of the restaurant staff were paparazzi. Consequently, they left through the back of the hotel in a black Mercedes and headed for his apartment. At 12:20 a.m. on August 31st, Diana and Dodi sat in the back of the car, while their chauffeur, Henri Paul, drove with their bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, seated in the passenger seat. As they sped ahead of the pursuing paparazzi through the streets of Paris towards the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at 12:23 a.m., driving at speeds of 85 miles per hour, the Mercedes clipped another car at the tunnel entrance. This collision caused them to crash into a pillar. Paul and Dodi died instantly in what a witness described as an impact that sounded like an explosion. A doctor named Frédéric Maillet, who was driving past in the opposite direction, stopped his car when he saw the crash and ran toward the scene. When he reached the car, he found Rees-Jones severely injured. Diana was on her knees facing the seat when Maillet approached. She looked up, asked him what had happened, and then complained of the pain she was experiencing before lowering her head and falling silent. As rescuers arrived at the scene in the hour that followed, Diana went into cardiac arrest as they attempted to cut her from the wreckage. Her heart was displaced and her pulmonary vein was torn. Despite resuscitation efforts and hours of surgery at Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, the Princess of Wales was pronounced dead at 4 a.m. Rees-Jones was the sole survivor, and an investigation found that he was the only person in the car wearing a seatbelt. These conclusions were confirmed by Operation Paget, an inquiry conducted by the British Metropolitan Police between 2004 and 2006. This investigation found that Henri Paul was indeed intoxicated on the night in question, and this, combined with the actions of the paparazzi who were chasing the car, resulted in what was later declared an unlawful killing due to gross negligence. The inquiry also confirmed that Diana had not been pregnant at the time of her death, a suspicion that had persisted since the events of 1997. On September 6, 1997, following tributes from around the world, Diana's funeral took place at Westminster Abbey. Her sons, Charles, the Duke of Edinburgh, and her brother walked behind her coffin as a large procession guided her to the public service, which was broadcast to approximately 2.5 billion viewers worldwide. Later that day, her body was interred in a private ceremony within the grounds of her family estate, Althorpe Park. She was dressed in a black gown and had the rosary beads that Mother Teresa had given her when they met. Diana is remembered as a fashion icon, a charity ambassador, and someone with whom the British public could relate, thanks to her displays of empathy and compassion and her often down-to-earth behavior. The dresses she wore continue to influence fashion long after her death, while she also did much to promote aspiring British fashion designers through her roles as patron and her associations with key figures within the industry. Her charity work, in particular focus on causes that carried stigma in the 1980s, enabled Diana to consistently raise the profile and encourage support, which undoubtedly assisted many individuals suffering from diseases such as HIV, AIDS, and leprosy. All of this ensured she is remembered as the People's Princess, someone unafraid of challenging traditionally reserved royal protocols by showing emotions that the average Western person understands. Beautiful and socially charming, she attracted attention at events and often used this to promote the welfare of others and causes she was passionate about. Conversely, Diana will also be associated with an unhappy marriage and a conflicted relationship between her desire to utilize the media and the invasive pressure this invited, which she ultimately could not manage. She felt confined within the strictures of the royal establishment and within a marriage where both parties committed adultery. Worse still, all of this unfolded publicly every step of the way for a vulnerable young woman who experienced mental health problems and bulimia. The confident persona often concealed an individual who struggled with life and failed to find sufficient support or empathy to alleviate the many internal battles she faced. Speaking out and revealing personal details about the royal family is remembered by some as Diana's betrayal of an iconic establishment she chose to join and from which she gained the power and influence that came with that decision. Opinion on her choice to give the BBC interview in the mid-1990s and contributed to Morton's revealing book divided public opinion both then and ever since. There is a postscript to the tragedy of Diana's untimely death and the spectacle her life became. On April 9, 2005, Prince Charles finally married Camilla Parker Bowles at the conclusion of what was effectively a 3 decades-long and enormously complicated courtship. This royal wedding was deliberately low-key, involving a small civil ceremony near Windsor Castle, as it was correctly perceived that it would remain controversial, even with the passage of 8 years since Diana's death. With the coronation of Prince Charles as King Charles III on May 6, 2023, Camilla was crowned as Queen Consort. Like previous royal spouses before her, this decision was made by Queen Elizabeth VI on her Platinum Jubilee in February 2022, just months before her own passing. This was not seen as the controversial decision it might have been many years prior. Charles and Camilla were sometimes perceived as the antagonists in the narrative of Diana's life. But in reality, there were no villains in Diana and Charles's story, simply a misguided decision to marry which both parties entered into of their own free will. What transpired afterwards was largely the result of inevitable media intrusion. Of course, Charles's coronation would prove controversial for other reasons in 2022. Diana's son Harry, together with his wife Meghan Markle, publicly drew parallels with her story, highlighting the intrusive nature of the press and the constraints of royal life becoming unbearable, much as they were at times for the late Princess of Wales. In the same year Harry withdrew further from his former royal life, Queen Elizabeth II died. Following her death, Charles ascended as king, Prince William became the new heir to the throne, and as a result, his wife Catherine became Princess of Wales, the title so famously held by his late mother. And so the hereditary royal establishment continues towards a new generation, apparently still grappling with its relationship with the media and public identity, while the impact of Diana's legacy can still be observed through her wide-reaching life as a princess, style icon, patron, wife, and mother. What are your thoughts on Diana, Princess of Wales? Do you believe Diana's media attention was detrimental or progressive for the royal establishment? And in what ways do you think Diana influenced the public perception of the royal family?